Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. My name is Xavier Katana. You are listening to the Human Experience Podcast. And we've got a phenomenal show. Information-packed show for you tonight. As usual, always come with the greatest information for your minds. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday was the solstice. It's a very sacred day. And so I spent a lot of the day just reflecting and meditating. And I thought, and I looked around and I thought, what has happened? What has happened to our relationship with each other? What has happened to us as a species? How did we get this way? What has the last 3 years done to us to make us this way? And ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to take that back. Take back our power. And that power is through union. Through a mutual understanding, a mutual respect, a connectedness, an understanding that we're all traversing this human experience together. So I want to ask for one thing. I don't usually do this, but, well, first of all, if you could just share this link to your friends and family right now, that would be great. Let people know where we are and that we're live. And whether you're listening to the live version or the podcast version, great. I'm charging it with a magnetic resonance and you will feel that. But ladies and gentlemen, I have an ask, okay? Because Christmas is coming up. And what I want to ask is I want you to do something for a total stranger. I want you to do something kind. I want you to go above and beyond for a complete and total stranger. That's not too much to ask, is it? I don't think so. So that's your homework for now. I'm going to end this monologue. I'm going to bring my guest. We're going to be getting into the paranormal, parapsychological. And my guest tonight, very interesting character, for sure. The human experience is transcending the astral plane as we hunt demons with my guest, Nathaniel Gillis. Nathaniel Gillis is an author and demonologist. He's spent over 20 years researching the phenomena of haunting, possession, and what he calls high strangeness. Nathaniel spent a decade in the deliverance ministry, but then later made the decision to take what he learned and assert those teachings into helping those who needed his help. Nathaniel, welcome to HXP.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be with you guys, and I'm looking forward to discussing this research.
I can't wait. I know you're a little under the weather, so we're going to keep it a little short tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, Nathaniel is such a gentleman that he is, he's not feeling that great. He did not cancel. He wanted to be here for us tonight. So
yes, sir.
That's the sign of a man who loves his work. Okay, so Nathaniel, I'm not going to ask you. You've done so many of these interviews, hundreds of these interviews at this point. I'm not gonna ask you to tell your story again. Let's just get right to the juice, man. Let's get right to it. Okay, so my understanding, My mentor was a guy named Robert Bruce. He wrote a book called Astral Dynamics. I was fortunate enough to meet him very early on, and we would talk about demons and stuff like that. That's something that would come up in conversation. And so you and I might have different training, but from what I understand, demon comes from a word with the Latin root daemon, which just means lesser god. But but
Mhm.
for you, what does this word mean, demon?
Well, a demon has various meanings and different origins. There's what's called a dialectical allomorph in linguistics. Basically means that you can have three or four different words that have different spellings and different pronunciations, but they all basically have the same meaning. Now, if you were to ask Nathaniel Gillis that, I would suggest humbly that what we're dealing with in demons are parasitic entities, and they're using laws that we ourselves are ignorant of that we're just now learning. They're using those laws against us. So that's really what inspired me to get into the field without giving my origin story, is to try to understand, okay, without defining them by using descriptions, let's just see what their behavioral patterns are. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So then, what did you find?
Well, when we're dealing with the demigod or the daemon, it's a reference to what's called the Atreus epic. It's an Akkadian slash Babylonian origin story of the world. And it speaks of individuals who, post mortem, they became semi divine. It uses a word called malakuma. And malakuma is a word that we dug up in ritual bowls, Mesopotamia, and in other shelf tombs. But that malakuma became Malakim in Hebrew mythology. And that Malakim became the angel in the New Testament.
Hmm.
So this makes sense. So what's really fascinating about this concept here is that in the Atreus epic, it refers to the ghost of a man. It says that the ghost of a man is made from the flesh of a god.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
one of their hypotheses was that there were some people who died and they became mutated ghosts, and then that mutated ghost became a demon. And
Hmm.
that's just one of the hypotheses out there. But we have to look at their behavioral patterns as well and see if that holds weight.
Okay. Okay. So are there different degrees? I mean, some are clearly more powerful than others, right? There are degrees of
Right.
demons, right?
Correct. Correct. There's an hierarchy currently right now. Um, but I would say this, that while they are all made of the same substance, they are not all of the same status. And so when we're dealing with the substance of consciousness, now we're dealing with the constitution of consciousness, right? That emerges from the dead when they transition into
Hmm.
the next dimension.
Hmm.
So my research as of late has consisted of trying to understand, okay, what are our ancestors calling them, right? And how has that evolved through history?
Hmm.
And what are we calling demons today? Because, and I will suggest to all the scholars out there, including you, it's possible that we're dealing with one phenomenon that's masking itself as demonic in antiquity and alien in modernity. And if that's
Hmm.
possible, then we are dealing with a more malevolent species of darkness than many want to believe.
Hmm. It's interesting. I'm so glad you're like a segue artist. That's exactly where I was going to go. Is
Awesome, man.
the study of demonology in ancient times, and I did go through this and look at this and try to find out. So ancient Mesopotamia, demons were believed to be evil spirits and
Mhm,
or gods that caused harm or chaos. Ancient
mhm,
Egypt, demons were often depicted as animals or hybrid with hybrid creatures with
mhm,
animal features, and they were also believed to be malevolent and they could cause illness or death. And ancient Greece, and this is interesting. In ancient Greece, demons were believed to be supernatural entities that could influence human affairs, and some were seen as malevolent, while others were seen as helpful or benevolent. And it
So
goes
that's a very
on.
good point.
It goes on. And I won't finish it, but you're right. We need to define this in modern times because when I think of the word demon, it evokes a not good feeling. I don't feel good when I hear the word demon.
No, not at all. Not at all. I will say this, it's fascinating to me because when you get into the ancient literature, you see a thematic element that evolves and coalesces into a very unique understanding of who and what they are. And one of the texts that I'm so fascinated is it's called "His Wind is Released." His wind is released. And prior to the Hebrew Bible being written, and I know there are going to be dogmatists that will crucify me for that, but just bear with me.
Mm,
Prior to the Hebrew Bible being written, there were various mythologies that kind of interloped together and found their way into the Hebrew texts.
hmm
And so, one of the Phoenician definitions of a demon was a lil spirit, Lil. Now, a lil spirit was the Phoenician word for breath, wind, and finally, spirit. But it wasn't some entity that fell from the skies or some Greek, god from Mount Olympus. This was quite literally a ghost, where, in that particular text it mentions, this is specifically a young man was talking to his sister and says that when my wind is released, my lil is released, bury
mm,
my body in this location. So what is the lil spirit? The lil spirit, again, is the evolution or the mutation of a deceased person. It's that God ghost that emerges at the moment of death.
hmm
Now, that translates, again, this is fascinating too, it translates into this being a Lilith or a Lalit spirit. Now,
hmm
when you get into Hebrew, if I ramble, just let me know, brother. Okay, I tend to do
Okay. Okay.
that. So in Hebrew mythology, they took that borrowed loan word Lil and they created Lilith. And
Right.
Lilith was
Right.
allegedly the first wife of Adam. And however, if you see what these beings are doing, you'll see their behavioral foot patterns, their bloody footprints in the snow. They've been doing
Hmm,
the same things. It's just we've been calling them different names. But
hmm,
Lilith was the ghost that was, because she was barren in real life, allegedly, according to the text, that she would go around harvesting seed and then going into a woman as a man, as an incubi spirit,
mm, hmm hmm
and inseminating them and then taking the fetus for a run. Now, that's the legend of Lilith, but what that points to is that there, like I said, it's a common thematic element throughout history, that at least some of these were perceived to be consciousness, which is,
Right.
I think, right where we're all wondering what it is, and that's where we're at.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't think it ends the study of the phenomena and
Mm,
learning and being at a point where okay, we need more information, more data, and maybe one day we'll be at that Star Trek level where we can just analyze it and know exactly what's going on and call it out for that. But right now, I mean, we can't even get modern science to acknowledge these things, and in fact, the phenomena itself is regarded as a stigma that people refuse to talk about their experiences with the otherworldly and anything related to that. Um,
right.
so okay. So Nathaniel, let me put you in a situation. Okay, let's say that I come up to you and I say, Nathaniel, you know I'm going through some weird things right now,
Mm,
and I don't know what's going on, and I have a feeling, I have a really bad feeling. Um, I think I might be experiencing some sort of haunting or possession, or some kind of demon is around.
mhm.
What are your first steps? What do you do in that scenario?
Well, obviously, I mean, it depends. It really depends on who I'm dealing with in terms of, is it a husband, as a wife? I want to include both of them in the conversation. As a researcher and as an applied demonologist, I have to be careful with what I ask outside of, a family. So I would talk to them both if she's married or if it's a woman. But I would specifically look for trauma in the past. I would look for suicidal ideation. And what I used to do, because I'm not going into homes currently, I'm more into the research, but
Hmm.
I would just pick up on their energy. And strangest thing was what happened. I would get images, I would get names of people.
Hmm.
I'll go ahead and share an anecdotal story with you all. But there was a gentleman that messaged me years ago. He was out of Cincinnati, And obviously, I'm not mentioning names, but he was a young guy. He's maybe about 23, and he says, "Look," he goes, "there are times when something possesses me." And he's like, and he goes, and I start downloading information that I would have never otherwise had. He says, but during that possession, I'm violent. I pick up my mom and I throw her across the room. He's like, I've been to jail before. There's just something wrong with me.
Wow.
And I said, well, is your mother there? And she was on, I guess I was on speakerphone. She goes, absolutely. What can I help you with? I said, well, I want to ask you a question. I said, it's an hour and a half away from me, you know, and I said, I don't do this for money. And I said, if I'm going to pay my own way and my own gas, my own time, I said, the only thing that I would request out of you humbly is that you work with me and you're honest,
Hmm.
right? And I said, now, is there a history of suicide in your family? Well, I'll tell you why I asked that question specifically later on. She said, no. I said, all right. I said, thank you for answering. I said, now, if I come to you guys, will you guys, again, work with me? I said, because I don't want to travel an hour and a half for somebody who's not willing to let this entity go because I have no authority. That entity will mock me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so she goes, no. So we get into it and just talking deeper. And I hang up the phone. And about 2 days later, I go into a vision. And in this vision, I'm sitting in her house. I've never been in her house, obviously.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting on a couch in the living room. There's a light on in the corner of the room. There's a lamp. And all of a sudden, it's the middle of the night, but all of a sudden, I see this male apparition with a black beard walk by me and walk into her room.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
And then instantly, I got the name David. And so I called her back and I said, I really, I asked you guys very kindly not to lie to me.
Hmm.
And they were both I'm on speakerphone again. And they're going, what do you mean, Nathaniel? We didn't lie to you. I said, no. I said, the other day I had a vision and I explained to them what I saw. The kid begins to freak out and he says, that's dad, mom.
Hmm. Hmm.
He said, and I said, his name was David. And the mom starts crying and said, yes, it is. I said, okay. I said, he committed suicide. She said, yes. I said, all right. Why am I seeing this? And the son was so stunned, he was almost speechless. But according to his testimony, he said that it was he who witnessed the apparition of his father
Hmm.
one night sitting on the couch.
Hmm.
And thankfully, I've been able to use tools like that. And obviously, they need help, and I'll help anybody that wants to be helped. But don't lie to me.
Hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because what
Yeah.
that means is we're starting off on the wrong foot,
Right.
and demons lie.
Right. And so then are you in your process, are you helping the demon become something else? Or are you helping the demon cross over or no longer be a demon?
There was one case that I had. It was a murder case where I'm not saying that because I'm some kind of detective. Somebody on another show told me that he thinks he's a detective. No, but it was a murder case, and the entity was a murderer. And when
Mm.
I did the cleansing, it was like somebody turned the lights off and then turned them back on. So when that entity left, I cannot tell you what happened to him. I know
Okay.
that he was a very very evil man in life, and what he had did is he killed his own daughter. And so when I first got there, I got there not knowing what happened. I had no context, no historical record for it.
Hmm.
But they called me specifically, not because it was a murder, but because there was paranormal activity happening in the house prior to it.
Hmm. So then if I'm getting the picture right, so then your goal is to help the family as much as possible. You look for if there are signs of trauma, deep rooted trauma, and then and if you can if and the goal is to stop the paranormal activity from occurring and the demon to go away. That's the goal.
Yes, yes, sir, yes, sir. And in the meantime, write notes on its behavioral patterns. Right? How did it lie? In what way did it lie? What language did it speak? I had a family call me about 3 years ago now, and they're friends of my family. And forgive me for the anecdotal stories, but I have to provide context to what I'm going to tell you before I tell you.
No problem. No problem.
But in this particular case, I was sitting outside. This is the summertime. It's about 2 in the morning, and I was working second shift, just relaxing outside. I get a phone call from the friend of the family, and they said, "You need to pray for our daughter." I'll not mention her name, of course. I said, "What's going on?" And the wife said that, well, this is actually during COVID.
Hmm.
forgive me. So she said, we're at the ER,
Hmm.
and she's in the hospital room throwing up. She has just an abdominal pain rather, that is that's reoccurring, and we can't stop it. And she said, "Can you pray for her?" And I said, "Well, I'll pray for her." But now this is very interesting too. On the phone call, it was me, and it was the stepfather, this girl's stepfather, and it was her real mother. But I immediately go into a trance, and on the left there was an apparition of a man. He had a goatee. He stunk. It was like body odor, and he smelled like cigarettes. So I knew he was a smoker. I immediately told the wife. I said, "There's a man here. His name is Dan." And I said, what I'm being communicated is that your daughter survived an absolutely explosively traumatic experience, and she's been feeling guilty and shameful and blaming herself. And I said, this entity. Now, for all of those who are going to listen to this, I pray that you'll take this to heart, because it will start making more sense to you if you've been through trauma in your life. There are entities that are so strategic that they will cause a traumatic experience to occur in
Hmm.
your life, and then use that trauma as a womb to birth something
Hmm.
in your life. And so I asked them, I said, look, I said, and it's another trance. I said, I've never been to your house, but I said, I see a Winnie the Pooh toy sitting on a fireplace.
Hmm.
And I said, I'm on a couch, and I said, there's a rocking chair. I said, now what I would ask you to do is, I said, in the name of God, I want you to go and take her by the hand when she gets out, set her on the couch. And I want you to simply ask her, has there been something traumatic in your life that's occurred, in that you would rather, you want us to talk about it with you, but it's almost like you're feeling silenced by something.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, and I always get emotional with this stuff, man. So, and
That's okay.
they set her down, and she started bawling. She said, a few years back, I was at a party. She said it's quite a college party, and I really meant to meet with my friend there, but when I got there, nobody was there but people that I didn't know. They were just plain strangers. And she said, and so I get a drink, and I'm just trying to meet new people. She said, I walk up the stairs and I go to the bathroom. And when I did, a very large man pulled me into the room. And I'm not going to get into the darkness here, but you guys can pick up what I'm putting down here.
Right.
And she said it was over and over again. And she said she didn't tell anybody.
Hmm.
And she said, suddenly now the nightmare started. And again, we're dealing with the pathology of a demon.
Okay.
The pathology of a demon for this particular entity was that it caused that trauma to occur to her, and then it manifested to her in her dreams. And her testimony was the atmosphere, the energy, the masculinity, the rage that I felt in those
Hmm.
nightmares with that entity
Hmm.
was the same embodiment that I felt with that man in that party.
Wow.
And she broke down and began to bawl. And when she did, she began to, and I don't want to use this in a weird way, but she began to share her story with people that were designed to help her heal. And when she told them that, they began to get her some help and therapy, and the entity never came back. The paranormal phenomenon stopped. So
Hmm.
there are at least some beings that, and I'm going to use this uh, specifically, their sexual pathology does not start in the nightmares or touching in the middle of the night. It starts sometimes with trauma. It could be an abuse from a father, it could be an abuse from a brother, or anything that happened in your life. Some of these beings will step into that trauma and use it to bend your will.
Hmm.
And the key to that is to deal with the trauma first, to close that bridge, and then the entity has to go.
And it makes a lot of sense to me, man. I mean, like psychologically, if you are experiencing a traumatic state, then
Mhm.
that traumatic event would create a type of hole in your aura, in your energetic
Mhm.
field, and that would be where this type of being could attach, connect, or even insert itself, and
Mhm.
like it's a very parasitic relationship. So it's
Over.
using your energy to empower itself, And
Mhm.
I think what they feed on the most is the dark emotions like fear, anger, rage, stuff like
Right.
that.
Yes, sir. And I experienced that in my youth, and I'm not going to share my origin story. You guys look up my other shows, you can see that. But like when I was a kid, I experienced a lot of trauma from the entity itself. The footsteps at nighttime. There were disembodied voices talking above my head, and whenever I encountered that entity, I kind of had to create a coping mechanism around it. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? I mean, it was when I was in the shower, it was there. When I was in bed, it was there. It wasn't omnipresent, but it was always lurking. And so what I started to tell myself was that there's no reason to fear it. It's projecting fear upon me as bait. And
Mm-hmm.
if I lean into that fear, then it takes authority over me. Because and I hear people say this: fear is faith in the devil, and I'm not one for cliches, but it really is. Do I fear it? Then it has authority.
So, Nathaniel, this is very, very intriguing. There's so many questions that I have entering my mind. So, one of them is it common, would you say, the night terror aspect of it, is that a common pathology? Is it common inside
Yes.
of,
Yeah. Every major monotheistic religion, absolutely. The exorcists record the same beings doing the same things at the same times. And so, in antiquity, we had Lamashtu, who was another being, and her pathology was this. We're going to get here to a point where you're going to see the modern UFO abduction phenomenon staring right back at you. All right. But what she would do is after Lilith would go and take seed from a man and then turn into the image of a man and then inseminate a woman, she would go and she would harvest the fetus out of
Mhm,
the body.
mhm,
And one of her pathologies is she would descend down in the middle of the night. The woman would have a dream, and in that dream, an entity would be there, and the entity would stare into their eyes. They would do something with their womb, and in the morning they would wake up and their baby's gone. That's called the missing
wow,
fetus syndrome in modernity.
wow.
Right. So we're looking, okay, we're not looking for names. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, what are they doing? Because I think that's what they're really hiding behind.
It's absolutely intriguing. I mean, do you think, like I've always had the feeling that the the power starts to shift when you find out their name.
Mhm.
Is this true?
It is in some cases, in Hebrew linguistics, the name for, well, the word for the name is nature. That's the definition of it. So that's why when you have the demon's name, you have its nature. Now, what is its nature? It's its behavioral pattern.
Mhm, mhm.
See, I'm kind of circling back here, right? Okay, so at this point, what do we have here? And so, but these beings, they're ancient, in my humble opinion, and they've been here for a long time, at least ever since death occurred. And that's the goal here. It's to hope that the veil thins enough for us to start realizing what we have to do because there is a war going on.
Man, I love your segues. I agree with you 100%.
Oh,
I
man.
believe we are in the middle of a spiritual war between light and dark, and it's very important is very important to have these types of discussions, not as a propagation of fear, but a propagation of
Right.
knowledge and empowerment. And this should empower you.
Absolutely.
Um, but what I was going to ask you is, are you noticing an increase in frequency in the last 3 years or so? Are you noticing an increase in the symptoms of like this type of phenomena or
Mhm.
possession? Are you noticing more of these demons on our plane here?
Yes, yes. And in many ways, they do manipulate the human condition. And I tell people in my lectures that in many cases, we are blinded by our own sight because what we're dealing with is a species that will propagandize us, use propaganda, and hide behind masks. And what I like to tell people too, because it's repetition is the mother of all learning, but I don't like to repeat myself. I like to repeat others. But I tell people they're playing a different game because they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game. And so far, we have, various accounts in antiquity where these beings would possess people.
Hmm.
And we are at war. We're at war with a species that is working laws that we are seemingly ignorant of.
Hmm.
And it's the job of researchers, experiencers alike, to test things on them. Does this work? No. Does this? Yes. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're after. Hard, hard hitting amulets, hard hitting words, or anything that can save us from this demise.
Nathaniel, there was an author that I adore. His books were authored in like the 1920s, so they weren't like filtered down.
Mm-hmm,
Arthur E. Powell was his name, and he
mm-hmm,
wrote a bunch of books on the astral body and various astral phenomena, and it was one of the key pieces of learning, other than the stuff that Mr. Bruce taught me, but and my own experiences. I used to have out of
mm-hmm,
body experiences all the time, every night. So one of the things that Arthur E. Powell talked about was that these types of sort of you could call them like little mischievous spirits. They
mm-hmm,
what they would do is they would hang out in these areas where people were drinking alcohol,
mm-hmm,
and what he said was that they would wait until the person had their first drink, which
mm-hmm,
lowered their ability to defend naturally, and then by the time they had their second drink, that's when they would make their primary connection, their first connection, and through
mm-hmm,
this connection they would give the impulse, drink more, you want
mm-hmm,
more. And 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 as this person got more and more drunk, they would assert more and more control, and feed more and more darkness, more dark
mm-hmm.
thoughts into this person. Does that sound like some of the stuff you've dealt with in the past?
Absolutely. There are, and I some of the Catholic tradition, I believe, some of it I don't. So I'm going to be using different terminologies here. But you have an exterior entity that wants to be an interior entity. And what it'll do is it'll introduce a substance into you, into your bloodstream, and then it'll send you a thought. Now, I grew up in a tradition that said the battle is in the mind. I don't think they really understood how deep that was. And I'm going to get into this real quick because it's going to blow your guys' mind. It blew my mind too. So it's going to be like a wow moment. So let me back up and say this. Long before these beings possessed people, they possessed statues.
Hmm. Hmm. That's
Yes,
interesting.
and yeah, and so your necromancy in Mesopotamia, what they would do is they would go to an artificer of metal, and this is in the book of Second Chronicles in the Hebrew text, and they would find a blacksmith essentially and say, "I want you to make an image of this entity."
Hmm.
And so then, and this is according to the text, people could say it's anecdotal. I get it, I get it. But anyway, so they would take this image of the demon home. And while they were sleeping, something would become alive in that image inside, break out of that metal, and now it's here.
Oh, wow, like a summoning.
Absolutely. Now, watch this. This is very, very unique, but it helps us understand their pathology. They molded the mind of that man long before that man went and told somebody to mold the entity,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Birth me, make me,
Hmm.
create an image of me so that I can be created in this dimension. Now, getting down to that, we're understanding that possession is the commandeering of consciousness, where that being doesn't possess a statue. Now it wants flesh and blood. And now here's what it does. It starts with a thought that's usually a self-deprecating thought. You're not good enough. Your dad was right to leave you. All of these thoughts. And then what it'll do is it will monitor whether or not you agree with
Hmm. Hmm.
it. And when you agree with it, then it has a hook in. And so the goal here is that it starts thinking for you, so much so that when it goes from an exterior to an interior entity and wants to act,
Mm-hmm.
Now it's going to act on your behalf, and you
Mm-hmm.
won't know it because you think, I thought that.
Mm.
Now, one of the ways to provide autonomy and agency to the individual is to say to them, these are not your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to diagnose it. But I'll shut up and
Can
I
can
ramble, man.
can one demon possess more than one person at a time?
I believe so.
Like a group
I believe
possession?
so. Yes, that may be controversial for some, especially those who are in my field. Yes, that more than one can be. Actually, you can have two people that are possessed by the same entity, because at this point we're dealing with consciousness, right? We're not dealing with localized consciousness. If it wants to branch out and possess two people at the same time, it can. Matter of fact, that murder case that I mentioned earlier, I had another case a year later. One like was right down the street from that house, same entity, or at
Mm-hmm.
least it appeared to have the same pathology.
Mm-hmm.
To demoralize the woman, to as an incubus. It would lay in bed at nighttime in between the husband and the wife. These are seriously sick beings. But yeah, so we have to pay attention to the bloody footprints in the snow. Like this is quite literally profiling a demon here. What are
Right.
they doing? Why are they doing it? That's really where I'm at in my field.
So then, okay, so we've discussed the problem. We're about halfway through. What is the
Mhm.
solution? Like, what do we do? How do we combat these whatever they are? This phenomenon. Like, what can we like? I mean, let's say, okay, for example, let's say that someone listening is suffering from night terrors. Um,
Mhm.
like, what would you recommend them to do? Like, what is an example? Just, I mean, you take it.
I had another anecdotal story. I had a couple that was suffering that it was affecting their marriage, and what I told them was, I would like you to make a covenant in that house together. Make a covenant, say your vows again, and renounce the presence of this being. Renounce it. That seems like a meaningless step, but it would surprise you how many people are like, "No, I'm not doing that," and then it doesn't leave. The second thing I'd do is I would wear religious amulets. Matter of fact, some of the women that met Lamashtu in antiquity, they went out on a limb here, but they're still hoping to figure this out like we are. But they would go out and they would take iron and they would make a fake face and then wear that second face as a necklace, hoping that when Lamashtu would stare into her eyes, that would actually stare into the iron itself. And in some ritual bowls, it says it works. So I would do that, and I would also again employ iron. I don't care if it's an iron cross, just iron. Third thing is, I would, if there was trauma in your life, I would seek therapy. I mean, there's times when I just have to do a cleansing, and
Mm-hmm.
there are times when this stuff is out of my hands. You need psychological therapy to get through these emotions, and then once that occurs, the PTSD that it caused is no longer there, and therefore the portal
Sure,
that it used to
sure.
come here is no longer there. So those are ways to do it. Now there are names that I am being told that when you use them, it works. Now it's almost like a doctor when he prescribes medication. Does it work every time? Not really. Sometimes it works for this person, sometimes it works for the other. Now, that's a whole other show, but the name of Jesus. I use the name
Yes.
of Yeshua, the first century name.
Okay.
Uh, that's what I do.
That's what I've heard, and what I've practiced myself as well
Mhm.
is that during these experiences, when you say the name, it's like a resonance that exists in the name Jesus Christ. When you say those words, it
Mhm.
greatly reduces or eliminates the phenomena completely, stops it in its tracks
Mhm.
there.
Right,
So
right,
so there's something to that. There's something to that archetype.
right. Yeah, and it's not them playing roles. So in my research, I found a lot of behavioral patterns where these beings will take on the role that we give them. This is particularly disturbing when there are people that are illiterate in terms of who Jesus was. And I don't mean that in a damning way. I'm saying they're not dumb or stupid. That's not at all. They just don't know.
Hmm.
There's a difference.
Hmm.
And so there was one experiencer. she was abducted by these beings, and she called on the name Jesus. And this is wild. It pulled an image out of her mind. And so it was literally like they asked her, okay, what do you think Jesus looked like? And then it was like a blonde Swedish Presbyterian. And that's how it manifested to her.
Hmm.
Which is very unique, right? They feed into our belief systems at times.
Mm-hmm.
And so, then it shows up, okay, you want Jesus, here I am. There was one experiencer that I had worked with where she was abducted, called on Jesus, and Jesus showed up, held his hand out and said, all seed belongs to me.
Hmm.
And I'm going to say this, and I won't, and we're all right. I know we're running out of time here, but I'm going to say this, and I don't want to scare people, but she had
Okay.
6 miscarriages.
I think they're already scared, but it's okay. And
Wait, not my intention. This is just the data. But
it's okay.
so we have to look at what we're saying and why we're saying it. One thing I really frown on is if it doesn't work for somebody, not going out there and crucifying them because they didn't have enough faith. Right? We
Okay.
can't we can't monitor their faith. We don't know them yet. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay. So, I think it's important that we recognize it as like in here in the physical realm there are
Right.
mosquitoes, right? And they're parasitic. They draw your blood. That's what they do to survive and live. That's
Mhm.
part it's part of nature, right? And so
Right.
in the astral realm there are these creatures that exist, and they are also parasitic in nature, except they affect here in the physical realm. They affect, and in the way that they affect us is it can vary. It can vary to the number of love. And what worries me though, Nathaniel, is that you say that in the last 3 years or so, it seems to be increasing because on a global level, I think there has been a global trauma that we've all experienced, and so perhaps that is a type of gateway for more of these dark things to come through. But like if we exist in a polarity, light and
Mhm.
dark, then where are the light? Where are the angels? Where are those people or beings?
It's a very good question. Throw a rock in the pond for the researchers like yourself out there and see what you guys think about it. But I do believe that a lot of these beings are performing high magic rituals. When Jack Parsons was moderating our rocket program in history,
Mm-hmm.
he was contacting these beings. He was contacting them using bastardized Kabbalistic rituals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the shortest horror story ever written was that the last man on Earth was alone in his house, and there came a knock at the door. Now, according to these texts, if Jack Parsons and Crowley employed these, they should not have worked. The basis of Kabbalistic, especially magic, is the humility of the man and the absolute fear of the Lord. But they had neither. And yet, when they branched out into that darkness, something was there that responded to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we're getting into high magic, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 13, there is a phenomenon that refers to some of these beings. Yahweh Elohim mentions people. They were embodied, but they were performing some of these same rituals. And essentially, he says, I have alt with you, those who hunt the souls of men to make them fly. Now, I know we're in the last chapter of the show, but I want to dig in really deep for everybody because this is the highlight of my work.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I love that.
Number one, we are dealing with a species that can induce people into a deep sleep and pull their souls out of their body. It's happened through abduction literature. It's happened in demonological literature. Whatever we're dealing has just an incredible knowledge about the soul, the afterlife, and how long a soul can be out of body before the body itself dies.
Hmm.
Now, what we're dealing with again, I had a remote viewer, actually a son of a remote viewer that called me one time. And he's like, he goes, my father was a famous remote viewer. He would leave his body and he would meet his guides. His guides would give him messages. And then when he would be back in his body, he would call up the local politicians and local celebrities and they would pay him thousands of dollars for a reading. They said it was nothing. He said it was nothing for my dad to do that. He said, matter of fact, it wasn't anything for my dad to go into a trance while I'm playing video games, turn all the lights off in the house, and tell me there's a being here that wants to talk to you. Now, these were not his guides. They were far more manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
He said that one night he loved video games. He said, I'm playing video games, and my father basically stumbles down the stairs. He's pale. He can't talk. He can barely breathe. And he said, my dad had a massive heart attack. He said, when we got him to the hospital, we're taking his shirt off to put his robe on. And subdermally, religious amulets came from underneath the skin to the surface.
What?
One of them was a cross. The other one was the Star of David. And this is the scary part. The last one was an overarching hieroglyphic from Egypt.
This came out of his skin.
Through the skin to the surface. Now, I'm telling you guys, and I'm getting passionate, but we are at war with something. See, here's the problem with demonology. Let me harp on my own field. We're so broken. We're so divided. The Catholic won't use the Star of David, but these beings did. And they used a cross against this individual. So the way they're using amulets is different than we are. They're using them in like terms of multiplication, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this soul to skin phenomenon is the same behavioral pattern we see in these soul hunters in the UFO abduction field. Mm-hmm. One night, Betty Luca was sleeping peacefully. Bob Luca, her husband, hears a rustling in the bed. He opens his eyes. When his eyes adjusted, he sees his wife's apparition being pulled out of her body. Mm-hmm. Soul hunters. This, I believe 100%. This is why the ancient text said they're not just after bodies, they're after souls. Now, when she got back into her body, Betty Luca, then the scoop marks manifested subdermally through the skin to the surface. Mm-hmm. This is a case study of behavioral patterns. They're doing the same thing as the same beings. Our job is to figure out why they're doing it.
Well, that makes me uncomfortable.
Well,
okay, so
right. What are they doing? Yeah.
So, I'm very curious to know your answer to this question. Do you think that the alien UFO encounter is a different type of demon or something extraterrestrial?
Well, I would include them as being demonic in nature. I mean, you asked a profound question earlier in the show. Like, what was a demon? Well, what's the difference between a demon and an angel? To many people in antiquity, you're a demon because you gave me bad news. You're an angel if you gave me good news. That's how shallow a lot of them were.
True.
So they really didn't classify them. But these beings have manifested to people as angels. There's a famous experiencer right now that believes Mother Mary, manifested to him. Now, let me show somebody a little bit of what's going on behind the veil. I say that with all humility. Okay, these beings are now teaching doctrine. And for all of those who despise religious fundamentalists, I despise many of them too. I grew up in that religion. I get it. But I think we need to start hypothesizing why they're teaching us as a species doctrines. Because there's one man, Paul, Shaul, who said, if another Jesus comes to you, then the one you've already received, run. And what he was dealing with is not just an entity that manifests. It's not just an entity that peels the soul out of the body, but he was also pointing out the fact that many of them will come to teach you doctrines. And if they're teaching doctrines, according to him, then we're dealing with the end times. I'm gonna end this little rant with this. Recently, I got a hold of a book by a Brahmin the Mage. And if you don't know who he was a Kabbalistic magician. So, he feared God. He didn't use his works against anyone. He used it for them. But anyways, he had encountered an individual who also had religious markings on their chest. Mm-hmm. It's the only person I've read that from. Mm-hmm. And he encountered them again. It was some of the same amulets But the kicker of it was that he encountered a being that carved hieroglyphics into someone. And when he witnessed that, he shrieked and he called that angel magic, which
Hmm.
would make perfect sense. And it kind of opens a lot of doors for us as researchers.
Hmm. And I think there is a huge amount of research. I don't think we're anywhere close to an answer of what's going on. I
Right.
think we're getting closer. I think talking about it is definitely a first step. I don't feel like we're organized enough to even approach a data set that can lead us to what these things actually are.
Correct. Correct. And so far, we're leaning on descriptions, personifications of the phenomenon or the face of the phenomenon. I will suggest that there is something hiding in the corner that's neither alien or what we would consider to be a fallen angel. The term fallen angel is never even in the Hebrew texts, it came afterwards. So, what are we dealing with? We don't know, but we do know that what they're doing is the same thing. And I would suggest that we're dealing with what I call the unified field theory.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same beings wearing different masks to manipulate us.
Hmm. There was There was a time when I was in. This is a long time ago, man. It's a couple decades ago. I used to run an OBE chat on IRC. If anyone out there remembers FNet, we were on there. Pound OBE, and I thought I was a badass, man. I thought I was the man, and because I felt like I had mastered the process of going out of body, and I'll always remember this day. This kid came into our chat room and he said, "Hey, this demon comes to me every night, drags me out of my body, takes me to a different world. In this other world, they, the scientists there, they find like a chest. They open the chest, even though they're warned not to open the chest, and the chest uh, emits this black smoke that they don't know why it continues to emit the black smoke, black smoke, black smoke until it covers the whole planet. And this kid, he said, it makes me watch this every night. Comes to me and it drags me out every single night. Happens. And I told him, I said, you know what, man? All right, I'm gonna I'm gonna project out. I'll be waiting. When it comes, let's see if we can fight it. And Nathaniel, I was batting out of my league, my friend. Like I lost in the worst way that you could lose. I lost, and it was
Yep.
like this horned minotaur, like hoofed, like demon. It was strong, much stronger than me, and I was I went back into my body, and when when I did, I thought, "Oh my god, what if it follows me here?" And it did. It did. I could
Wow.
feel it in the room. And just as I thought, "Oh my god, I've just made the biggest mistake I could ever possibly make." This
Hmm.
this little white ball of light entered the room, and it just erased the demon completely. It's just gone. Like the moment that I thought, "Oh my god, I'm in big trouble." It was just
Hmm.
gone. It just ended. I never saw it again.
That's profound, my friend. That's profound. Thank you for sharing that. When I was a kid, I had a similar experience. The entity I was dealing with was, at first, it manifested as a little girl. Manifested as a little girl, and then it turned to a shadow person later on as it evolved. And one night, just like you, I thought, man, I'm done. It was following me to friends' houses. It was meeting me in my dreams. The same nightmare occurred. And finally, I just called on God. I said, God, I don't know what this is or why it wants me, but I'm asking for divine intervention. And something else walked into that room, my friend. And that entity left. And to this day, even having murder cases, it was the most powerful being I've met.
Hmm.
Thankfully.
So Nathaniel, I really think I do think that these beings they have to respect a certain law of free will, and they do gain our tacit
Hmm.
acceptance of they trick us into letting themselves in further, but they also obey a higher order of light, and when that is respected, and when it is used, they have to obey that.
Right. Right. And they'll recognize people too. You know what I mean? If you're known to be a wounded healer and turning your wounds into wisdom, they'll notice that. You'll be on their radar. And they'll do something to stop you. You know, the entity that I faced as a young boy was suicide. And and that's the easiest demon to spot in my career. I've had people call me in the middle of the night. I didn't feel a lick of God. Nothing. Nothing. So the very end of the phone call, when I'm saying, well, you know what, I'll call you tomorrow, and then I feel something brush by me, suicide, and then the person is delivered. So you use discernment, but I'm going to thank you guys for having me on, man. I've looked at all your you guys have some cannons as guests, and you got little old Nate on, so I really appreciate it.
Oh no, Nathaniel, it's my honor, our honor, for to just scratch the surface of this topic. And I know that you are very, very sick, and I really, truly appreciate your time very, very, very much, man. Thank you so much. I hope you
Yeah.
heal up. And um, guys, anyone that's listening, there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, we're not completely lost, but this is a spiritual war, and I think it's important. It's important to know that I don't think it helps us to be in ignorance of the war itself. And with that, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna get canceled. We're gonna go ahead and end the show here, guys. I apologize. I know we were supposed to go for a little bit longer, but I can say there's a very, very big guest that I have locked in. He just did a Netflix series. I won't say his name, but I'm sure you can guess who it is. But I want to thank you guys, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. And we're gonna get out of here. Don't lose hope, my friends. And just remember that if you're listening to my voice right now, you are the resistance.